What does this let Iran do? Break it down. How much money are we talking?
We're talking about potentially tens of billions of dollars in a relatively short period of time.
Welcome to Eye for Iran, where we go beyond the headlines to bring you deeper insight into Iran and the forces shaping the region. Well, the MOU in action, Tehran to get billions, the economic breakdown with our experts, how much money, when, and who is set to really benefit.
What has Iran actually done to deserve this level of sanctions relief?
It seems like U.S. administration has concluded it is moving toward a different paradigm.
Then, why did the Trump administration make such a dramatic shift? Some call it a victory for the U.S., and some said it's full compliance with key Iranian demands. We examine what changed behind the scenes and why some analysts believe Tehran successfully influenced members of America's negotiating team.
The 14-point MOU is a concession for a promise.
And finally, what does Iran look like after Khamenei Sr.? Is the Islamic Republic gradually evolving into a more militarized state, or is clerical rule proving more resilient than many had expected? As morality police return to the streets and a prominent artist is sentenced to 74 lashes for live streaming music, we examine the future of power, repression, and control inside Iran.
We are going to see a lot of infighting within the Islamic Republic on who is going to shape the next phase of the Islamic Republic.
I'm Negar Mojtahedi, and this is Eye for Iran. For a breakdown of the economic aspect of the MOU, we're joined by FTD sanctions expert and former Treasury official Max Meizlish and Iran International economist and senior journalist Mohamad Machine-Chian. Thank you so much to you both for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great to have you both on. So, the US Treasury just issued a new license, General License X, that reopens Iran's oil, petrochemical, including not just oil, but petrochemical businesses to essentially the whole world. Max, you were once at OFAC. What does this let Iran do? You know, break it down. How much money are we talking? And why does this matter?
So we're talking about potentially tens of billions of dollars in a relatively short period of time. Only some of that will go to the IRGC and the Iranian military, but it's going to be a significant sum that goes directly to them. And what we know is that the general license in its current form, we're recording just the day after its release, is that it's pretty much unconditioned, unrestricted access to the proceeds of Iranian oil, petroleum products, and petrochemicals. And so this is a pretty important point to make, that this is unconditioned, unrestricted sanctions relief that's going to provide billions of dollars to the regime in a way where they might actually be able to access U.S. dollars, since that's specifically referenced in the general license. We should look at this in the context of other recent general licenses. For instance, where the U.S. has authorized dealings in Venezuela. The U.S. has taken a much more restrictive approach, requiring that funds be put into restricted accounts, where the U.S. can actually manage the money that goes out of those accounts. It's put in restrictions on joint ventures involving Chinese firms operating in Venezuela. But we haven't seen anything like that with respect to the Iran general license that was just put out, which substantiates this notion that the administration really is trying to put forward unconditioned, unrestricted sanctions relief right now as we go on with more negotiations with the regime.
Okay, so my question is the obvious one: why? And then B, my understanding with this General License X is that it not only gives you permission to sell, it gives you permission to get paid, like you said, in U.S. dollars, and that also entities that have been blacklisted are also part of this, meaning you can use them.
Yeah, that's 100% correct. As for why, we know that the administration has been fighting the kinetic battle in its war against Iran, but also the battle against the market. And so it's totally possible that the administration sees the need to ease prices for oil, for diesel, jet fuel, for all of these things that were having a stranglehold due to the blockade from Iran in the Strait of Hormuz. So relieving pressure there is going to allow for prices to come down, particularly ahead of the November election. So that's one reason for why, and I think the primary driving factor here. Now, but to your your point about Iran being able to get paid, this is a really important point, right? The general license allows for all steps taken necessary to be taken to for Iran to repatriate these funds. And one of the concerns that I have at a very high level is that the general license X, does not indicate if it's only effective for transactions that take place moving forward, right? So after the issuance of the general license. And so what that means is that there needs to be some clarity from the Treasury Department as to whether Iran might actually be able to repatriate funds for oil sales that occurred previously, so prior to the general license being issued, when they wouldn't have otherwise been authorized. And so that would mean, if they are able to, that even more billions of dollars could suddenly become accessible to the regime in short order.
Wow. So, Mohammed, turning to you now, I mean, this means that up front, without concessions, the Iranian regime will be making money.
Well, yes, absolutely. I wouldn't say without concessions. I think in return, they have to open up, allow for the investigators, for the nuclear program, things like that. I'm not sure
They
how
said
much.
they won't, though. He came out, the spokesperson for the foreign ministry basically negated what JD Vance was saying about allowing the IAEA inspectors in.
You're right about that. Yes, it is a very weird, ironic situation, I have to say. I think we have to make note of that. When we follow domestic media inside of Iran, there's a very different scenario is happening. And here in the United States, again, very different story and from different people. Even yesterday, you're right. Vice President J.D. Vance said so. They denied it. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said to admit, so potentially will sometime in the future, he expects them to allow them. And later, the president said that they will, absolutely. So I don't know which one is going to happen, but I think, as they mentioned before, probably one of the main points is that Iran should comply. And at least they expect the Islamic Republic to comply with in order to receive the funds. I'm not sure how successful they're going to be in actually enforcing that. Islamic Republic, as you mentioned, has shown an immense resilience and stubbornness, even to the point of being stubborn, not to comply. And good luck, I would say, actually enforcing those. Nonetheless, I think in the best case scenario, probably US politicians are expecting the Islamic Republic to go along with some of their expectations. The nuclear sites being one of them, Hormuz reopening being another one. So these are the things that was very important, as Max correctly pointed out. And the other thing is, I think the way my read is actually of the MOU is that U.S. expects to have a great deal of control over the money that goes into Iran. So basically, they have to sign off on many things. About the sales, the oil sales before, we know for a fact that, for example, the oil sales for the South Korea, they are trying to control how it's going to be spent. So that can be the case for the rest of the proceedings of the oil sales prior to General License X. But again, Max knows far more about that. I'm actually curious to know his take on this.
Yeah, so Max, your take, and also at this, just to help me understand, like at this point in time, while there may be expectations for the Iranian regime, are they literally making money right now as we speak?
The Trump administration has said that any relief that the Iranian regime gets throughout this negotiation and whatever deal might come forward is going to be performance-based. And so that is a very good bumper sticker. We would expect that the United States would not give up its leverage unconditionally. But we also see that there were real issues with how the MOU was structured, right? It talks about rolling back U.S. sanctions. It talks about giving unconditional access to frozen funds to be utilized by the central bank of Iran and sent to any beneficiary of its choosing. And right now, we see immediate sanctions relief in the form of this general license being issued just days after the MOU was signed. So there's really no constraints on how Iran can utilize that general license right now. There are some technical limitations that we can discuss. Right, the reality here is that General License X, just like General License U, which was issued earlier in the war, authorizing the sale of Iranian oil already at sea, is supposed to be technically targeted at U.S. persons, but OFAC, the Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, which administers U.S. sanctions and issued the general license, its typical practice is to not target entities that are engaging in conduct that would otherwise be authorized for U.S. persons. And so, in effect, what we are likely to see is more offtake of Iranian oil by its traditional buyers. And there's no entity that has benefited or will benefit more from this next to Iran than China, which has bought 90% of Iran's exported oil supply. But it's important to, again, highlight, right, this isn't just limited to crude oil. It also extends to Iran's petroleum products and also the petrochemical sector, which was not included in General License U during the war. So the United States, for all the talk that we've put out in the Trump administration about this being performance-based, let's be clear-eyed about what has Iran actually done to deserve this level of sanctions relief. What it's done is it's taken its foot off the pedal in terms of the blockade, right? So it's easing some of the restrictions there. Again, according to the terms of the MOU, this is for 60 days where they won't have any charges. But there's ongoing talks right now between Iran and Oman about the future of the strait, talking about services and fees associated for transit through the strait. And so aside from relieving the pressure on the blockade and allowing some ships to exit, what else has Iran done? Well, it's actually been a party to the MOU. And so that's all the regime has actually done. And I would say that this isn't really consistent with what we would expect from being a performance-based deal where the United States is giving up a significant amount of its leverage targeting at the regime in a way that is, like I said, unrestricted and unconditioned, because there is no escrow mechanism for the sale of Iranian oil. There's no reporting requirements on at all. And so really the United States has no insight into how these funds will be used. There's, on the one hand, a conversation about the frozen assets that belong to Iran held in accounts abroad in places like Qatar and places like South Korea. Those are supposed to be utilized for humanitarian purchases. Those are in a controlled method of being utilized by the regime. But the oil sales and this general license that is allowing for them to occur is entirely different, and it has no such protections. So the regime will be utilizing billions of dollars in oil revenue to presumably rearm itself and prepare for whatever comes down the road, but depending on the fate of negotiations. And look, the reality here is that this is the same regime as it ever was, right? And so the way that U.S. sanctions are implemented, President Trump or whoever comes after him can continue issuing waivers to give sanctions relief to the Iranian regime. But statutorily, much of the U.S. Comprehensive sanctions architecture on Iran is codified in statute, and it would require presidential certifications that Iran no longer supports terrorism and that it's no longer building a ballistic missile program in order for those sanctions to be completely terminated. So I can't imagine a world in which the the Iranian regime as it is no longer going to support its proxies and be the leading state sponsor of terrorism. And by the way, let's recognize the fact that the current negotiations don't even pertain to Iran's ballistic missile program. So whatever the Trump administration does now and whatever administration comes after it does, the reality is that there's still going to be immense sanctions exposure to Iran, meaning that presumably companies will believe that it is not in their interest and to invest in Iran, and that doing so would present significant risk. So what does this mean? At the end of the day, it means that we're back to a status quo, right? We're back to oil sales going directly to China funneling money into Iran, and for the regime to utilize that funds, and in this case, potentially even US dollars, to rearm itself and build up its support and its infrastructure that was degraded during the course of the military campaign of Operation Epic Fury.
Yeah, and just days before this latest proposal, you had the U.S. officials at the Treasury office describing Iranian oil revenues sales as a major source of funding for Tehran's armed forces, regional partners, and proxies. And I quote, Iran's oil and petroleum exports are a primary source of revenue for its armed forces, terrorist partners, and proxies. That's what the State Department wrote in a letter sent to Congress on June 16th. So I mean, on the assumption that not much has changed since a few days ago, right?
No, this is the same regime as it ever was, right? We saw there were two different sanctions designations that came out in May, where Treasury was talking about Iran's oil sales as being a key source of revenue for its military, how the military oppresses the people, takes that revenue and builds it and funnels it into rearmament, threatening U.S. interests and the interests of U.S. partners in the region. And then, like you said, the State Department just issued this report to Congress noting the importance of oil sales to funding Iran's military. And so, at a high level, what we know is that Iran's oil revenue, about a third of it is directed at the military and the IRGC. And so what we can expect is that money is going to be utilized in the same ways that it was before. This is not a regime that cares about the livelihood, health, and wellness of its people. In fact, they've killed tens of thousands of innocent Iranians in recent months during the buildup to this war. So I can't expect anyone in the Trump administration reasonably thinking that all of a sudden the Iranian regime is going to use this revenue for the good of its people. And even when it comes to the authorized humanitarian trade, we have to be cognizant of the fact that there are black markets that can emerge. There can be price gouging that can emerge, all benefiting the Iranian regime and the insiders that are close to the kleptocracy. So any relief that we're giving up now, in my view, is not commensurate with the steps that Iran has actually taken, which truly is limited to just opening up one of the most important international waterways in the world and agreeing to participate in ongoing negotiations. That is just not what is commensurate in this supposedly performance-based relief.
So, Mohamad, you touched on U.S. control over this, and we can talk about the money, the Iranian money that's been, or Iranian assets that have been frozen and that are in Qatar are now or potentially going to be used to buy American goods like soybeans. And we had J.D. Vance on Monday, the vice president, say if Iranian assets are ever unfrozen, they're going to go make American farmers richer and to feed the Iranian people. And he also added that the United States and Qatar would oversee the process of this trade. So not just the Americans, but also the Qataris. What do you make of this process? How much control do the Americans really have? And to Max's point, how can they ensure that, okay, sure, they might buy the American products. How can we make sure it's going to actually go to the Iranian people? I mean, look at what Hamas did with food distribution in Gaza.
Well, I don't think there's any way to make sure that it gets to actually Iranian people. And to Max's point, I agree. In the past, we have seen this consistently acknowledged even by politicians inside Iran that, it's opaque, corruption is rampant, and I don't expect, but I'm sure U.S. politicians, policymakers have absolutely no control in how all the products bought from the U.S. is going to be distributed inside of Iran. On the other side, yes, they mentioned that the entire money in Qatar, which comes from South Korea, they sold oil and President Biden, I think, if I remember correctly, moved it to Qatar, but it wasn't sent back to Iran. That's only $6 billion. And the rest of the frozen assets, I think immediate frozen assets, Iran claims that they have more than between 100 to $150 billion worth of frozen assets around the world. But we're talking about specifically these between $6 to $12 billion. And $6 billion is supposed, to my understanding, to bought wheat grains from the US. And I think that's the end of it. The other thing to point out is that this is not the first time, the only time that Iran is buying wheat or other grains from the US. I remember even back in 2008, 2009, Iran bought a great deal of wheat from the US, I think, and onward in the past few years, even during the first term of President Trump, they did buy because it was categorized under humanitarian, so it wasn't sanctioned. But at the same time, the limitation there was their access to banking financial infrastructure, international financial infrastructure. So basically, the Iranian banking system is not still connected to the rest of the world, and I think that will be one of the limitations. So, on paper, they may or may not be allowed to do something, but at least as of yet, Iranian banks are not yet connected to the rest of the world, and it will remain one of the limitations. And in order to get connected, it's not just sanctions; they also have to join FATF and other conventions in order to be able to. And that's a very long process. And inside Iran, domestically, they have not been able to convince. There are different factions, pro and against joining FATF and things like that. And of course, FATF, to Max's point again, they want to be able to fund their proxies abroad, their terrorist groups and so forth. And in order to do that, FATF will going to be a difficult pill to swallow. And to my understanding, at least, that the main opposition to joining FATF is exactly that to think. The other thing I wanted to point out, two more quick notes. One regarding China, I think, if anything, the MOU increases the price of oil for China, because as long as the Hormuz Strait is open, Iran will send oil to China. But during sanctions, they didn't receive back the money. So the money had to be stored somewhere in China. Some of it they could. It's a very complicated, convoluted process. We can get into details. But part of it, they have to get goods or services from Chinese firms. And again, there's a great deal of accounting gymnastics to facilitate that. And there's a great deal of overhead margin for Chinese firms facilitating these kinds of things. And even then, China bought Iranian oil at a great discount. So in the new regime, whatever its, I think, inefficiencies may be, and there are shortcomings definitely in this, but in regards to China, I think it's not really helping China. And even during the war, as long as, even when the Strait of Hormuz was closed to other countries, Iran was sending oil to China. And if the Hormuz Strait is going to be reopened, they will again send oil to China, whether there is sanction or not. The other thing, I think, the last limitation I think we have to touch on is the expiration date and the current waivers. I think if Islamic Republic, and it kind of overlaps with the negotiations, I think, especially if the negotiations are going to be renewed, and I expect the negotiations to be delayed again and probably renewed for another 60 days maybe. But in any case, I think there's an expiration date, and that expiration date kind of, I guess, going to force the Iranian hands to comply. If not, it's not going to be renewed, maybe.
Before I get to your before I get to your reaction, Max, I just wanted to quickly ask Mohamad, with all of this, with the this trade between, unfreezing the assets and getting U.S. products and goods for humanitarian aid, would that help lower inflation domestically in Iran and prevent the economy from collapsing?
Well, in a sense, maybe. Uh, what I'm talking about is that the Iranian central bank is currently very low on on forex reserves, basically. And that puts a great deal of pressure on them to be able to control exchange rate, basically. And exchange rate is the main anchor of Iranian rial at the moment. So basically, the tools that are in the toolbox of the central bank, interest rate in Iran is a highly inflationary situation, isn't really effective anymore, and they need a great deal of USD forex reserves in order to be able to do that. And in that regard, these funds are going to help the Islamic Republic immensely. Otherwise, we were getting close to hyperinflation territories. The inflation of last month was 9%, just 9% in a month. And if that continued, that would be definitely, we are already in 3-digit inflation situation. So in that regard, yes, it's going to help.
Max, yes, please. I'd love to get your reaction to what Mohamad was saying, especially with regards to China.
Right. So on this notion of whether the sanctions relief will help or hurt China, it is my strong conviction that China stands to benefit significantly from this general license. The reason why is that rooted in U.S. Sanctions on Iran is the fact that Iran is still a designated foreign terrorist organization, or FTO, which means that there is a criminal liability exposure tied to dealings with the IRGC. In as much as the IRGC is an FTO, and until such time that it is not, there's a significant risk of criminal prosecution by the Department of Justice here in the United States against any financial institutions that are found to be dealing in or are supporting transactions with the IRGC. And so, since the IRGC controls so much of the sectors covered by GLX, with the crude oil, petroleum products, and petrochemicals industry, any sales that are taken pursuant to General License X will implicate dealings with the IRGC. And what we know is that so much of dollar-based transactions clear through the United States through banks in New York. And so even though dollar-denominated transactions are authorized based on GLX, no OFAC general license can just singularly waive the IRGC's FTO designation. And so in terms of willing buyers, particularly in the scope of a short-term license, right? This is only a 60-day general license. What I think that this means is that the pool of buyers available to actually purchase Iranian oil remains small. And so the Chinese have the infrastructure, they have the financial infrastructure, they have the shipping infrastructure. They're familiar with dealing with all of these sanctioned parties that had previous sanctions exposure that they're now authorized to deal with more easily. And so what this means is that the buyer pool will still remain small, and China will be able to still demand of Iran a discounted price on oil. And frankly, they might even push for oil sales in RMB, even though dollar-denominated transactions are theoretically authorized pursuant to the general license. So, in my view, second only to Iran, China stands to benefit the most from this general license.
And Max, the Iranian regime says that they have over $270 billion in damages from the war. The U.S. is giving a $300 billion fund in reconstruction. So what does that actually entail? Do they get money out of this? Is this going to manufacturing companies that the U.S. and Israel bombed because they said it was used for, dual use? What does this all mean?
It's just too early to say definitively what the future will hold for this supposed $300 billion reconstruction fund. There were early reports saying that about half of the funds had already been committed from various partner countries. I think that this is going to depend a lot on the outcome of the negotiations over Iran's nuclear program, over its support for terrorism. But in my view, since there's so much here that relates to the IRGC in its involvement in heavy industry in Iran through its construction sector and various parts of petrochemical facilities that might need to be rebuilt, or infrastructure in terms of transportation, right? All of this is linked back to the IRGC and the hardliners in the regime. We're going to have a significant rollback or waiver regime within the United States to authorize these transactions. Or, right, the other way that this could actually go is that you just see a significant lax approach to enforcement, right? The administration could just adopt a position of non-enforcement with respect to entities abroad that want to engage with Iran. But, I think that this is a really important point to highlight, right? There's going to be a lot of money that could funnel into Iran to support reconstruction. But it's the Chinese who have been supporting a lot of construction over the years in Iran. They're the ones who've been funding all of this madness to begin with by purchasing 90% of Iran's exported oil. And so I would think that it's important that the United States take a position, a principled position, and restrict the ability of any Chinese firms from being able to essentially double dip here, from funding the war that got us to this place and then benefiting on the back end by engaging in reconstruction. But look, this is the reality. This is the new status quo, I think, that we're going to see in the Gulf, where countries targeted by Iran want to maintain some level of stability with the regime. They don't want to be targeted in the future. They want to maintain cordial relationships. They want to benefit from potential economic opportunity here with respect to reconstruction. And so I think that the impetus is on the United States to actually stick to its guns and maintain a principled position of aggressive enforcement where there's a nexus to the IRGC. Because if the United States takes its foot off of the pedal and eases its enforcement posture, then we're going to see an inflow of cash unlike any other in recent times.
And so, Max, you feel that the IRGC in this process are only going to get stronger?
Yeah, here, this is what we've seen is for supposedly, performance-based relief already, the IRGC is on the receiving end of a huge financial windfall, billions of dollars coming in. And then if it's able to secure long-term hundreds of billions of dollars of investment into sectors of the Iranian economy that it controls directly or indirectly, well, there's no other way of looking at it than the IRGC comes out on top. But to be fair, right, we know that the IRGC is a military function of the Iranian regime, and the Iranian regime's military has been hit significantly, right? It has been degraded in terms of its capacity to project power and threaten the interests of the United States, Israel, and other regional countries. But this is all a capacity that can be rebuilt over the years. And unless the agreement that the United States strikes with Iran covers its support for terrorism and it covers its ballistic missile program, then what we can expect is that Iran will continue to invest significantly in those sectors and further enrich the kleptocratic allies of the regime hardliners in the IRGC.
Just to conclude with both of you, Mohamad, I'll start with you, and then Max will end with you. If you could briefly tell us, in one sentence if you can, your biggest takeaway of this MOU when it comes to the economic angle for our audience to better understand this, what would it be?
Well, to my understanding, it seems like U.S. administration has concluded it is moving toward a different paradigm, if you will. Before that, they were relying on sanctions and then maximum pressure. And in my estimation, maximum pressure, especially along with blockade, was working. nonetheless, I think they're moving towards something else, and that is to provide incentives and try to basically direct and control using incentives. If that's going to be successful, remain to be seen. And so far, there are different factions inside of Iran. And by the way, I hear this a lot, and I think there's a misunderstanding. People make the distinction between the Islamic Republic and the IRGC as if these are different. And Max rightfully said that that's the military arm of the Islamic Republic. I would go even a couple of steps further. First, this negotiations, agreement, whatever we call it, is with the IRGC. So it's not with a separate entity that has nothing to do with the IRGC. Ghalibaf is a IRGC general. Pezeshkian is an IRGC commander. Araqchi.
She too, yeah.
Same IRGC commander. And Ahmad Vahidi, again, one of the main leaders, currently supposedly in charge, again, head of IRGC. So, and one more thing is that IRGC is not only a militia group, it's also an economic cartel, which is holding a great deal of Iranian industries and economy in their hands. And as we speak, of course, IRGC is not just one bloc. There's a fracture within IRGC, and different factions within IRGC, of course, are competing and fighting each other's. They have been at each other's throats. And it seems to me, again, as far as we can see, that the administration thinks they can negotiate and deal with a part of IRGC and be able to control them. Again, if that's going to be successful, we have to wait and see.
Max, your biggest takeaway, and do you agree with Mohamad that we're moving away from, maximum pressure to incentives and then compliance?
Yeah, this is a little bit of a bumper sticker answer, right? But I think it's backed in some truth. Is that if the MOU is acted upon based on what we've seen in the text and then the limited amount that we've actually seen be implemented from the U.S. side, I fear that we are at risk of moving from maximum pressure to maximum appeasement. And I think that if the United States under the Trump administration is trying to wrap up its engagement with Iran, then it's looking for an exit that's going to produce the maximum amount of stability. And so the maximum amount of stability can be guaranteed by maximum appeasement over the short to midterm. This does not negate or discount any potential for long-term instability that can be caused by Iranian aggression. But it doesn't seem that the administration right now is concerned with that. If it were, then we would be pushing more aggressively, not just on the nuclear file, but on the regime's support for its terrorist proxies, and critically on the ballistic missile issue, which is just not part of this agreement. And so I fear that the MOU is a pretext for appeasing the regime and creating some short-term stability that will advantage the administration and its political allies in the short term as the United States approaches a series of elections in November, but leave a lot of the more difficult questions up for a future administration down the road. And in the interim, what we're likely to see is Iran come out much more advantageous in terms of its financial position than it could have been if we maintained maximum pressure and went even further in targeting Iran's financial enablers in China, Hong Kong, the UAE, and Oman, and Turkey, and elsewhere. And it might even be in a position where, in partnership with Oman, it maintains more active control and financial tolling or fees imposing that regime through the Strait of Hormuz in a way that could create a really destabilizing and uncomfortable new status quo. So that's my fear. We will see how it goes, right? We are in an active point of negotiations. President Trump has shown that he is willing at times to quickly pivot from the course that the administration has taken in one instance compared to the next. But I do fear that the administration is trying to create more stability in the region, and it incorrectly is viewing that stability can be achieved through appeasement of the regime.
Well, thank you so much, Max Meizlish, Mohamad Machine-Chian. I learned a lot from both of you today. Appreciate your time. Former U.S. military intelligence officer Michael Pregent joins us now. Thank you for being here, Michael.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Of course, it's always a pleasure. I wanted to talk to you about Iranian regime influence, Qatari influence on the U.S. negotiating team. So there are actually pictures of Qatar's prime minister essentially writing out the terms of the MOU next to Witkoff and Kushner. How much influence do the Qataris have on this deal?
Well, what's interesting is how much money Qatar has given both of those individuals, Witkoff and Kushner. It's all out there for the audience to see. Just look at what Qatar did for Witkoff, $526 million to bail him out of a real estate deal, and then they gave Jared Kushner upwards of $1 billion. It's all out there, and to have Qatar sit there and actually change the language, like, well, let's make it sound like this. If you look at the language of the MOU, the language is so caveated in favor of Tehran that it simply says, every article, 14 articles, each article is a concession by the U.S. for a promise, the same promise Wendy Sherman used when defending the JCPOA. They promised to never, ever, ever, never develop a nuclear weapon. Well, if that's the case, then why did we have, Midnight Hammer? Why did we have Epic Fury? Why did we continue to put sanctions? Because a promise means nothing. It is a way to lie to a non-believer, or it's a way to lie to Americans, and our officials keep believing the lie. And the argument is, hey, we don't want forever war. It's just like when Trita Parsi said during the JCPOA, it's this deal or war. Vance is saying the same thing now. It's the people that want forever wars that are against this MOU. The reason we have forever wars, Mr. Vice President, is because of this type of thinking. Allowing a regime that paid for our forever wars in Afghanistan and Iraq by providing safe harbor, training, funding to not only the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, but to Al-Qaeda and the Shia militias inside of Iraq. And add Qatar to that mix. Qatar did the same thing. Qatar financed Al-Qaeda inside of Afghanistan, financed it inside of Iraq, along with the Shia militias, and then gave them a platform, Al Jazeera, to put out more propaganda, to show them using weapons to kill Americans. This is what veterans of these forever wars remember. It's not the military that lost these wars. It's politicians like we're seeing right now that make these wars continue. Just because we're not involved with boots on the ground doesn't mean that the regime is not preparing for the day after Trump to basically, take advantage of its permissive environment, its new economic status. And if Vance is president, let's just say Vance wins, right? What does that signal to Tehran? You have an anti-Israel veteran, veterans should be, civilians are very hesitant to criticize somebody's military service, but a veteran should not. A veteran should be able to look at Vance's military service and say, thank you for serving, but this is not what a service member would say. A veteran of Iran's terror campaign inside of Iraq would say about a regime
that has killed Americans.
Oh, well, this is a new regime. We've done regime change already.
Yeah, what do you think about that? This is a new regime that we keep hearing.
Well, factually, it's correct. It's new leaders, but it's the same people. And we have to remember what happens when you kill a leader. The next guy up has to be more violent. Has to be more, has to be more violent in order to gain credibility. And we haven't seen that from the supreme leader because we don't even know if there's proof of life that he's around. But we're hearing that from, Zahedi and others in the IRGC that are basically saying, these negotiators, that's just a way to buy time. Let's open up we need the money. We need this money to come into Iran so we can continue to rebuild our military infrastructure that was destroyed during Operation Epic Fury. The biggest question out there is, why are we giving them $300 billion to repair missile factories, drone factories, missile capabilities, buy new equipment? We shouldn't be doing that because that leads to a forever war. So I hear the same language that the Obama administration used with the JCPOA here. It's just, I did not expect it from this administration. And the wild card, of course, is how much is Trump going to allow the regime to insult him? And what does he do when he's reached that threshold? That's the wild card here. In the last 24 hours, or last 36 hours, we heard Trump say, if they don't get on this, we're going to start bombing again. So
Yeah.
this is that wild card that's always there. And you have Vance out there, cheerleading this event, basically saying the IAEA is back in Iran. Well, that was the status quo, man.
And also the Iranian regime came out today. The spokesperson for the foreign ministry is like, nope, we didn't say that.
And then what did our administration say to that? Oh, they're just saying that because they need to appease their domestic
Save face.
base. I'm like, come on, guys, don't be like the Obama administration. We're here because of the Obama administration's JCPOA. We decimated the regime's military capabilities during Operation Epic Fury, and then ended up apologizing for it with this MOU. And it's embarrassing.
Yeah, some people call it a memorandum of undoing.
Yes.
And
I wouldn't say
I've seen
misunderstanding, a memorandum of undressing and undressing us.
That's definitely another way to put it. And I saw some side-by-side comparisons, like you said, of Obama during the JCPOA years and now JD Vance, and them saying, well, what is the alternative? The only alternative then is, like you said, this forever war. So can you explain JD Vance's worldview and who may be influencing him? He does appear on that podcast with Tucker Carlson, and he does might be more part of this MAGA isolationist wing of the Trump camp that is now turning against Israel too.
Yeah, the language I heard from Vance the other day, using harsh language to threaten Israel, I just basically want to say, hey, pretend Iran is Israel and now do that to Iran.
Yeah.
Because you should not hear that from a vice president going after our strongest ally in the region. Everything the terrorists learned, they learned fighting Israel. Everything we've learned to counter terrorism, to put counterterrorism operations in place, we learned from Israel. So JD Vance's, worldview is, what's best for America. So I get it. That's a sincere position, but it's flawed in that taking out the regime is best for America. If you want to keep American sons and daughters from going into future conflict in the Middle East, why not get rid of the one actor that's always behind these types of things? And, JD Vance, what I said the other day on another interview, I said, listen, he built his reputation and his following during the culture war here in the U.S., the low-hanging fruit. Should men be in women's bathrooms? Most people would say, no, they shouldn't. So that's where he built his credibility. Should we have closed borders? Yeah, that kind of makes sense. And now he takes it to the international stage, and he looks like he doesn't know what he's talking about, especially with his World War II comments. World War II was ended based on a negotiation. No, it wasn't.
No, it wasn't.
It was complete surrender and domination. And this is not that. What message does this send to Russia and China? If you can't handle this low-hanging fruit, which is Iran, the regime, then you can't handle China when it comes to Taiwan. You can't handle Russia. So his thinking is they believe this. They really believe this. I voted for Trump. I'm not MAGA. I'm not one of these anti-Israel guys. A lot of Democrats voted for Trump that didn't want to because they wanted a safe neighborhood and a good economy. A lot of independents voted for Trump because of the culture war. The borders and all these ridiculous things that the Biden administration was pushing on the American people. They truly believe that they somehow have this following of Americans that will just agree with everything they say. And when those of us that are criticizing the MOU, they start calling us warmongers and, idiots and things like that. And so, listen, your only argument is that you don't want a forever war. Well, the way you keep a forever war from happening is you deal with the regime now. We've been at war with the regime for 40 years. We just haven't acknowledged it. They have. the biggest thing that the 5D chess thing that everybody talks about when it comes to Trump is he's just doing this to get gas prices down before the midterm elections, and then he'll go back to bombing. So I have a intel group that I work with, a private sector one. I'm a co-founder of it, and we basically have a methodology put in place. It's the intel cell we never had inside the IC. That there's rigorous analytical, uh, you know, competition. There's a winner. We don't do consensus, but we also do the dissenting opinion also. And it basically shows the escalate, the return of violence, the return to kinetic action in the fourth quarter of 2026. Just based on everything that we're seeing, based on all the violations, based on what the administration is trying to cover when it comes to Iran closing the strait, charging fines, deciding who gets through, and continuing to push Lebanon into this deal where Iran controls Lebanon. So if Iran wants Lebanon or Lebanese Hezbollah in the deal, then the Trump administration should say you'll be held accountable for every Lebanese Hezbollah attack on Israel. But that's not happening. They're telling Israel, stop, absorb the attacks. Come on. And that to me is such a betrayal of an ally. We betrayed the Kurds in Iraq. We betrayed the Kurds in northern Syria. We have recent examples of betrayal, but we've never done this to this level to an ally that's basically fighting U.S. designated terrorist organizations that have killed Americans. They're fighting our enemies, and we're criticizing them for doing that.
Yeah. And many people in Iran feel, some say that they've also been betrayed too, that the people of Iran are also the biggest losers in all of this.
Absolutely. You kill the supreme leader. You do this bombing campaign. Of course, it was 60 days after you said help is on the way. And they actually started believing it when these types of things happen. And then all of a sudden it's another bumper sticker campaign. I criticized the 12-day war, campaign that the president wanted to go down in history as the shortest war in history, second to the 6-day war. And it's like, no, it's not. It's a pause. It's a pause. It's a ceasefire because you're trying to get a political win out of it. But if you care about Americans in the future, after you leave office, you take care of this regime now.
Yeah.
But you look at the way everything's set up. You mentioned Qatar earlier. Trump has even joked about being a PR guy for this prime minister of Qatar, Al-Thani, and just doing that. So he looked at him during that, what is that ridiculous thing that they stood up, the Board of Peace or whatever it is?
Yeah, the Board of Peace, yeah.
With Erdogan in Qatar and basically said, hey, you're not—
all the rogue states.
Yeah, he's like, you're not very popular. And Sisi thought he was talking about him, but he was actually talking about Al-Thani. He goes, I'll do PR for you when this is all over. And I'm telling you, the Trump family, if Democrats really wanted to go after Trump, all they would have to do is pull the thread on Qatar. The problem is Qatar got to the Democrats first. This is that $300 billion going to Iran is Qatari money. And then the president, I don't know, this is lost on a lot of people. The president announced that Qatar was going to invest, several $1 trillion in the U.S. economy, in the military, technology sectors, and the AI sectors. So it's kind of like during negotiations, Al-Thani said, hey, we're going to give Iran $300 billion. And Trump said, well, if you're going to give them $300 billion, why don't you give us $1 trillion? I mean, you could almost see that happening because that's how Witkoff thinks, Jared Kushner thinks. And, we sat across from Jared Kushner in 2016 when he was talking about, they tried to give a peace, create a peace plan for the Palestinians. They were going to give them economic incentives. And once again, Qatari money. And they turned it down. And the Trump administration believes that you can change somebody's ideology with a payoff because they have changed their positions for payoffs. But
isn't that what Obama believed too?
Yeah, but that's not how these terrorist organizations work. They say, okay, we have the weakling in the neighborhood that's trying to pay off the bullies, so let's take the money and then ask for more. It is embarrassing, and I know I sound like an alarmist, and I know I'm very critical of the administration, but I've seen this play out time and time again over the last since I've been looking at it over the last 30 years. And we're seeing the same mistakes. Militaries don't lose wars, politicians do. And this administration right now, poor Rubio has to go out there and travel to the Middle East to try to sell Vance's, hey, this is great. We've opened the Strait of Hormuz and we have the IAEA inspectors back in Iran. I'm like, yeah, kind of had that before.
Way before.
Yeah. So what is this all about? It's like Obama after they killed Osama bin Laden said Al-Qaeda is dead and Ford is back, during his 2012 campaign for re-election. And Vance has been criticized for his admiration of the Obama administration and Obama himself. And we're just seeing that. And again, Tucker Carlson and Vance built their following on the culture war. And now with an actual war, they sound like idiots.
Yeah, it's a very different ball field. So why do you suppose we're here? Is it because of the Qatari and Iranian regime experts' initiative influence and infiltration on the U.S. negotiating team?
You have Erdogan is able to talk to President Trump directly. You have Tom Barak, who's Trump's guy, feeding the same information, meaning don't attack Iran, let's get peace, let's get the economy going again. Then you have Qatar being able to talk to Jared Kushner and Witkoff, knowing that they have a direct link to Trump. And it's so obvious that nobody talks about it. That picture of Al-Thani sitting at a computer with Jared Kushner and Witkoff, drafting the MOU, using that vague language that benefits Tehran. And again, every point in the 14-point MOU is a concession for a promise.
And you've warned us about the potential. I remember we spoke last year and we were talking specifically about Witkoff and Qatari influence. You also said that, this is surprising to you, but given the influence and the connections here, are we going to see more of the same?
If you're an adversary of the United States and you're worried about something, you go and talk to Al-Thani. And you basically say, I need your help here. And you'll get a sympathetic argument that will get to Trump. And, it is, I don't even know how to describe it. I don't want to think that it's as simple as money. But it is. It looks like it. I mean, look at the Trump brother, or the Trump sons, the brothers. Jared Kushner, Witkoff, Trump's cabinet have all been Qatari lobbyists, a lot of them. And Qatar's influence to be able to sit down with a vice president, even the picture with Vance, sit down with Kushner, J.D. Vance, and be able to look over the shoulder of the American negotiator and change the language. I thought the Qataris were just simply passing a message to the Iranians. I didn't know they were drafting the message. And then on the other side, they're doing the same thing with the Iranians. You can't have Pakistan, who provided safe haven and funding to the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. You can't have Qatar, who funded Al-Qaeda and acted as a pass-through for Iranian money to go to its proxies. Negotiate a deal. Every Qatari negotiated outcome is a failure for U.S. National security. Bo Bergdahl, an embarrassment. The Hamas situation, that was touted as a success. Hamas is not disarmed. I like that Morocco's in there. I like they're part of the Abraham Accords, but I don't want it to be a wink-wink op. The UN is supposed to be on our side, and every time they go in there, they simply negotiate with a terrorist organization and turn the other way when it does something. There's a saying in Moroccan, "Sidq fil bir," which means your secret is in the well, and I hope they don't use that with Hamas. I want these terrorist organizations, again, that are American enemies, that are designated by the U.S., to not be given these lifelines, because Jared Kushner and Witkoff are taught that a deal is about compromise, that a deal is a real estate transaction. You don't do the same level of concessions with a terrorist organization. You make the terrorist organization beg you for its survival and you set the conditions. We're apologizing for our success with Operation Epic Fury. And it's an affront to veterans, and it's an affront to American sons and daughters that will have to fight future conflict because of these bad decisions.
You mentioned earlier that your intel company is forecasting more violence, more war after the primaries. Then what's the point of essentially equipping the adversary with money
Well, right
in the
now
meantime?
they need to focus that money on keeping the population. So, I mean, that's the argument you're hearing from the regime or from the administration. Excuse me. Um, so they're like, listen, they're broke. They need this money so desperately. $12 billion can't do anything to help them. They've lost so much money that this will be a drop in the bucket. We're not worried about what they can do. Like $12 billion can buy a lot of military capabilities, and you don't need much. All you need to do is be able to pay off a proxy. And this is an argument I made back during the JCPOA. And they said, Iran doesn't have a lot of money. I said, well, the Saudis will spend $50 million on an aircraft they won't fly at night. But the regime will spend $50 million on a terrorist organization that can kill and will do these things. And so what's more effective? A terrorist organization willing to kill Americans and our allies and, conduct, some very harsh terrorist, activities like we saw with October 7th, or a expensive aircraft that benefits the U.S. military complex, and the Saudis won't fly it at night. And if they do fly it during the daytime, they'll miss the target by doing it. Inshallah, hopefully this bomb hits that target and end up killing a bunch of civilians, which leads to Americans having to fight these proxies like the Houthis and these other groups. It's so easy to fix. Easy is not difficult here. The hard thing to do is actually easy here. But we continue to do the opposite. And it's going to cost us in the future. Our politicians are just based on immediate successes. And the factors that we're putting into this report, it's basically, what happens if what Iran is saying is true, and then what happens if what the president's saying is actually true. And the president and what J.D. Vance are saying is laughable. What the regime is saying is standard playbook.
Yeah.
It's what they've done in the past. And so, this Wall Street Journal article that came out today that the president and J.D. Vance are very against is factual. It just goes against their narrative. And when Qatar loses the Washington Post, that's big.
Yeah.
They shut down the LNG production. The Washington Post came out and Qatar's like, we didn't do that. You lose the Washington Post, and Trump loses the Wall Street Journal, which is probably lost for a while now. It's concerning to people that are experts and that follow this. But Americans hear that one-liner, hey, we're just trying to end these forever wars, guys, and lower gas prices. And Iran's going to buy farm goods from the U.S. Sorry about my camera here. And it's embarrassing.
Yeah, and like you said, many people are concerned that within the next 5 years, we could see another October 7th or potentially even another 9/11. Michael, any final concluding thoughts before I let you go?
Since I'm out of focus, I can say anything right now. We just have to look at, you have to sit back, because you can get mad every day you read something or hear something from this administration. Wait 24 hours, you'll see the administration so embarrassed by what is actually happening that it counters what it said 24 to 48 hours ago. So we're kind of in that territory right now with Trump and J.D. Vance. So listen to what Rubio says when he's caught on a mic, Rubio's a pretty honest guy. Let's see what Rubio says. I'm pretty sure he's not out there trying to sell this. He's probably telling them, listen, this is temporary. We're just doing this right now to test the regime. We're giving them enough rope to hang themselves, and then we're going to take action. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, Rubio's been very silent too, in public at least. Thank you so much, Michael, for joining us today on Eye for Iran. Really appreciate your time and your expertise.
Apologies for the camera there.
Omid Memarian, he's an Iran analyst and director of communications at Dawn. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me on.
Great. So, Omid, a few months ago, you were on, actually, it was last year. So, it was before the massacre. It was before the war. You were on Eye for Iran. We talked about how the majority of society is hijabless. We talked about how people were killed during Women Life Freedom to get to that point where there was some sort of, opening up in society. But now we're seeing videos coming out that we're receiving here at Iran International, again, of the morality police out in full force. We're also seeing the opposite in very kind of affluent, rich areas where I even saw a Western themed bar, if you will. I don't know if they're actually serving alcohol or not. In some places they do, and we talked about that in the last time you were here. Dressed up as cowboys and the whole works of the whole Western themed pub. So what is the reality in Iran right now? It's very confusing when these images come out and people try and really use it to politicize their own narrative. So what's really happening?
For many years, women's dress code and controlling how women dress up in the society was one of the measures, one of the pillars of the Iranian government's identity. But we saw that over the past years, as particularly during the after the women life freedom movement, that type of control eroded dramatically, very quickly. And what happened was that people in massive numbers, they participated in in civil disobedience, and they started to ignore some of the controlling mechanisms, the police and the Basiji forces, all those layers of control after the women like freedom. And I think the government at one point understood that it's a lost cause if they want to go after so many people, and it's going to have a huge political cost, and it's going to erode much more of the trust or the legitimacy the government has. So they accepted that at the top level. It seems they accepted that this is going to be the new way forward. But the problem was that their supporters did not accept this new arrangement, and so there was a gap between the government or those who ran the country, ruled the country, the leadership, or those who strategize what are the best moves for the regime, and their supporters who for many years were gathered and energized around this cause. So we had people who were pro-hijab, people who were against hijab, people with the regime against the regime. What happened after the war was that the war basically helped the Iranian government to gap one of its ideological gaps, divides. So before the war, the divide was between pro-hijab people and anti-hijab people, pro-government people, anti-government people. But the war allowed the Islamic Republic of Iran to change that duality, to change that binary to, are you for Iran or are you against Iran? Are you for the attack? Are you for the war or are you against the war? Are you for the destruction of Iran or are you against the destruction of Iran? And so in that new binary, even those who even participated in the protest, even those who were political prisoners or activists or people who were staunch opponents of the regime, but they didn't want the war, they went to this camp of the regime, or they basically were on the other side. So they could incorporate them within their camp and say, these are the people who are against the military attack. And so their supporters, we saw that so many people without hijab or without the type of dress code that we have seen supported by the regime. They attended many of their gatherings at night. And so it was a best opportunity for the government to fill that gap and tell its supporters, it's those who were against this new arrangement, that you can choose not to have a hijab. You can wear whatever you want as long as you are with Iran and you're against the war, you're against the destruction of the country. And I think I've never seen in the recent history that anyone more than Israel or the US, by the attack that they launched, helped to revive the Islamic Republic, help them to somehow bridge some of the gaps when it comes to their identity, and help them to rally people behind the flag and resolve to some extent, or at least for a very small period of time, or at least for this time, some of the major issues.
So what is their identity now then? I think that's the part that's so confusing, because now we do see the morality police out in full force. So maybe those that were kind of the ones that were in favor of the hijab within the hard line and making these concessions to, I guess, appease people to bring them over to their camp, like you said, might be walking back now that the MOU has been signed, now that they've economically been strengthened and given a lifeline by the U.S. administration. And also, on another point, can't people make the distinction between, can't you be both, like two things at the same time, be against this regime, be against the war, and be all those things at once?
It's true, and that's what happened. That there are so many people who are against the regime. They have a history of fighting against the regime and pay a heavy price. But at the same time, they understand, or their understanding was that the war is beyond the Islamic Republic. It's
Yeah.
beyond the regime. It's about Iran. It's about the destruction of Iran. And this time, we have to protect the country. One of the major developments of the war is the fact that the Iranian government tries to portray itself as an organized and disciplined, as a very as untouched by the devastating attacks they received during the war, and that they are everything is as usual. The things are working as usual, and nothing has changed. But we have to understand this massive attack that happened, and the killing of military and political leadership has cost for the regime. And it's going to show itself in the next few weeks, few months, few years, that created a huge vacuum, in particular when it comes to the government's identity. Some of their pillars some of the pillars of their identity, and the fact that they are going to struggle with some of the changes that occurred during the war, particularly the killing of Khamenei, who was the leader. So at this point, what we know is that the Iranian government is going to deal with identity crisis. That's
Interesting. So they're going through an identity crisis right now. So how do you see this post-Khamenei senior Iran shaping up to be then, in your view? Because before the massacre and the war, and I had talked to analysts about what a post-Khamenei Iran would be like, a lot of the things that I had heard was moving away from this notion of political Islam and more to kind of IRGC and militarization. Do you see that happening, or will the clerical establishment just not be happy with that?
it's not that who's going to emerge on top. The is that Khamenei was the dominant political figure in Iran. His absence has created fractures within the Islamic Republic. The war allowed the Islamic Republic to rally different groups behind the flag and unify their base of support, unify the loyalists and those who believe in the regime. That was a major service to the Islamic Republic, particularly after the killing of Khamenei. But that's not sustainable when the threat of war is away from Iran. And we are going to see infighting within the Islamic Republic. We are going to see different groups trying to emerge on top and to take control, have a more dominant role, and that has not happened yet, because still the threat of war is on Iran, and the fact is that the war might resume at any moment. But once that threat is away from Iran, we are going to see a lot of infighting within the Islamic Republic on who is going to shape the next phase of the Islamic Republic, who's going to define what's the identity, what are the values, and what to defend. Right now, we are seeing that those who are in favor of resistance, they're trying to cash out what happened during the war and say we resisted, we fought back, and we won the U.S. and Israel, and so we should have the say over what's going to happen next. But we see there are other sides that who say, okay, the war happened, and then there was a resistance, but you're not capable of running the country after the war. So we are going to see this divide to deepen in the next few weeks, next few months, and if they last, next few years.
Wow. So as the dust settles, we're really going to see, I guess, the aftermath of all of this, months of the trauma from the massacre, then the war, as the Islamic Republic tries to figure out its identity after Khamenei Sr. Will we see what the real face of this regime will emerge for people? So in that case, could that infighting be so bad that it would lead to the collapse of the regime from within, from themselves? Because what if they can't decide on what their identity is? I mean, already the U.S. is saying in order to unfreeze these assets, you have to do trade with us. Well, what about the founding figures of the Islamic Republic that believed in a resistance economy, that you can't do business with this so-called great Satan? And that even Khamenei Sr. said that American goods or our products are a form of cultural invasion.
You have been witnessing and reporting, things have changed rapidly over the past few weeks. The idea that the Iranian head of parliament meet with senior American officials was so remote in our minds
It's
before the war.
unbelievable, yeah.
It was unbelievable. The fact that Iran's foreign minister and Iran's the head of parliament, Iranian speaker, House speaker, go and visit with J.D. Vance in Switzerland was something very remote in our minds, thinking about the US-Iran relationship. But we see that there is a new way of thinking about what's going to happen next. And Ghalibaf, IRGC, and many others try to basically dictate or put their stamp on this new way. The fact that they accept to meet with Americans, it shows that, first of all, even before Khamenei's death, there was a push that if we want to negotiate with the US, we should directly talk with them. If we want to make the best of the situation when it comes to our leverages, if we have any, we have to speak with them directly. Now we see that brand of politics in Iran is pushing forward, is making a leap. And as I think, as we see a lot of attention inside the country too, many people are happy with the fact that Iranians and Americans can talk to each other directly. So, but there are other factions. We saw over the past few days that a faction of very hardline politics in Iran, which was very much actually on the sidelines and on the periphery of Iranian politics, and then came to the center of politics in Iran right after the war. They even said, we have to have a blockade on Iranian airports so the negotiators cannot travel. So we have that brand of politics in Iran too. But at the same time, it seems that, there is a fight between different brands, between different factions who try to shape the new identity of the Islamic Republic. Whether that's successful or not, we have to see how it's gonna what's gonna happen next. But I think the major point here is that they once the threat of war is removed from Iran, from Iran, they have to deal with so much expectations coming from the people. People who are frustrated with the government, economically, politically, culturally, socially, in many different ways. People are super frustrated. And yes, they might have, or many of them, or some of them might have supported, didn't support the war, or they thought that, this is against Iran as a culture, as a unit of identity or geography or civilization. But at the same time, they understand that there was no need for Iran to get into war, back-to-back wars. There was no need for that. And if they had wars, it was because the government went to directions that brought wars to Iran. So they would have, the government would have so many, they would face so many questions from people to respond.
So from what I gather, in the next, 6 months, that could determine essentially the future of the Islamic Republic, whether we see it the way that we've known it for 47 years, or potentially even the collapse of the regime?
The Islamic Republic has shown to be very resilient in many different ways. And one of the signs of resilience is to have U-turns at points that are essential for the regime. The question here now is whether the Islamic Republic can turn again, and you have a U-turn, and whether that U-turn still allows the Islamic Republic to survive. Because sometimes U-turns might break the back of the regime, and so it's going to be very difficult for them. At this point, if Ghalibaf is negotiating with the Americans, if they are meeting with them, if they are trying to create an opening in these conversations to bring economic relief for Iranians, they know that once the threat of war is away from Iran, there would be a lot of expectations. There has been a lot of destruction in Iran. Millions of people have lost their jobs, and people don't see any lights at the end of the tunnel. And it's very hard to rule on people who don't see any lights at the end of the tunnel. They can do anything. So I think there are people in Iran who understand the urgency of action and rapid action, rapid changes inside Iran. And there is one other faction that believes that we fought the war. We were the people behind launchers and those boats, speedboats and airplanes and all that. And so we have to rule the country. And those people who didn't engage in the war, they don't have any say. So if they prevail, we are going to see more repression, much more deeper repression inside the country. And even though they might open up to the rest of the world when it comes to economy, even though socially, even in Iran, they might there might be less restriction, but they're going to be much deeper political repression inside the country. So at this stage that we are in now, right when the negotiations are ongoing, I think there are a few factions. They are fighting to come up with a more clear identity for the Islamic Republic and to see what the Islamic Republic really means after the killing of Khamenei and the two wars that we have had in the past year.
So a real existential crisis then for this regime.
This is a very serious crisis for the regime. They have never been to this point before. The lack of the vacuum of not having Khamenei, I think, is huge. What happened was that the war allowed the Islamic Republic to absorb some of the pressure, some of the damages that the killing created. Also, the enemy was in a different place. Like Israel attacked Iran in a way, and that allowed the Islamic Republic to gather support in the global South. Even in the U.S., we see people support even in the US, we see that there are so many people who are against the war, and they see this war as Israel's war in the region. And Israel by itself, Israel's brand has damaged over the past few years because of what they have been doing in Gaza, the genocide that has been happening in Gaza. What is happening in the West Bank, has been really bad for the image of Israel, both in Europe and in the US. And even in the US, we see even during the primaries, many candidates try to distance themselves from Israel. So this country that is at the middle of a genocide attacks Iran and wants to free the Iranian people. I think that was a gift from heaven for the Iranian government, because everybody who has been fighting fighting against the Iranian regime, the pillar and the main point has been to improve the human rights situation. And the fact that the Iranian government is a very repressive regime, they violate human rights, they execute people, they kill people. That has been the core, and
they're still doing it. They're still killing.
They are
Iranian
still
people.
killing, and that has been the foundation of the fight against the Iranian regime. And I think there has been a lot of momentum for this fight because the Iranian government has become more repressive over time. So at this stage, that the core value and principle to fight against the regime is human rights values, is democratic values. A country that is involved in a genocide trying to free the Iranian people. I think that was a gift from heaven for the Iranian government, because that imbalance of values and principles really overnight became irrelevant for them.
And just to conclude, how would you characterize the Islamic Republic right now? And based on what you're saying, it seems like there is going to be change. We just don't know what that change is once the dust settles, so to speak. And potentially we could see maybe another uprising after all of this.
I believe that the Islamic Republic, the government in Iran, maybe they are able, maybe, it's a maybe, that they can deal with the possibility of a military attack, or can observe another round of war with the US and Israel. But what is difficult for them is the post-war Iran. It's going to be very difficult for the Iranian government to deal with the Iranian people with this level of expectations and frustration and disappointment after the war. Once the war is over, the government is going to, they don't have resources. They don't have enough resources to respond to people's grievances and demands. And there would be a lot of, I assume that in the next few months, if they cannot open up economically and socially and politically to some extent for people to breathe and to create this hope that things are changing for the Iranians, we are going to see massive protests. But this is not. This has not gone away. We are going to go back to the January where where we left off, and the war happened a month after. So, and I think that terrifies the Iranian government, because they understand, probably they have polls, internal polls, confidential polls done by their intelligence, that there is a lot of fire under the ashes. And once the war is settled and the threat of war is away from Iran, the government has so much to do. And I think the Iranian government is not prepared for that. I think that's the fear. That's why we are going to, whether with the economic relief on one side and opening up the society to some extent to create some space for breathing, for people to breathe, or we are going to go with a much deeper repression when it comes to social and political rights, and maybe some economic relief. But at the same time, there are two different camps that we have to see how this infighting within the Islamic Republic is going to unfold in the next few months, and who's going to win this fight.
Yeah, and the infighting, as you said, is incredibly serious and genuine. And this chapter is definitely not closed, as the Islamic Republic, like you said, deals with one of the biggest existential or identity crises of its time ever. Thank you so much, Omid Memarian, for joining us today on Eye for Iran.
Well, if you like this episode, you can hit the like button. You can also leave us a comment, let us know what you think. You can sign up for our weekly briefing newsletter at iranintl.com/newsletter, and go check out our dedicated English website at iranintl.com/en.